with my wife, and we worked on the business for a number of years before her stepping away from the business. In terms of my background, so I'm going to be 40 next year, so I guess I'm due a crisis or something. But probably have a few of those. Yeah, so founded the company 10 years ago. I actually started my career at 16, so I was in the US Air Force for 5 years, and started as an engineer and avionics technician. Then I got into the US Air Force Academy, which is it's a bit like Sandhurst. Did a few years there, and then kind of decided I didn't actually want a long career in the military for various reasons. Did some degrees, did up to PhD level, mostly in economics, but focused on health. So I'm very, very interested in human health and, of course, planetary health, which I'm sure we're going to discuss a lot tonight. And they're very, very interlinked. Worked at Deloitte, EY, worked on Whitehall for a while on a dementia program. And then had some family tragedies, so I lost both my parents in the space of 2 years. We'd had 3 children along the way, so got to the age of kind of 29 and kind of reassessed what I wanted to do, and first heard about vertical farming from these kind of shipping container models that were emerging in the US at that time, and decided to take the jump. So that's kind of where the genesis, I guess, of the business started.
So it's interesting, I mean, because I don't think I could take on something that big a challenge, I'd say.
Well, there's many components to unpack there. So I read a book from, I can't remember the author, but it was Plant Factories with Artificial Lighting, PFALs, which is actually the technical term for what a vertical farm is. So I read that, thought it was interesting, thought that the models that I'd seen in the US were not really addressing food and water security, and decided that it would be something interesting to try in a different way in London. Found a abandoned, well, not abandoned, but a very rundown warehouse in Deptford, and went to the bank. Had a little bit of money from my parents, obviously, from their passing. Went to HSBC, who were very supportive, and took a full debenture on all my assets. Put everything at risk, and then spent probably, I'd say, the first 6 to 9 months figuring out, we obviously used a different technology provider initially because, knew nothing about the technology. So that farm was built during that time, and then I spent that time trying to get my fingers from, I guess, whatever color to green, because I definitely did not have green fingers, and I probably still don't. I'm working on it. Got to that point, and then just for the first 3.5 years of the business, we are what's classified as growers. I guess I should actually probably give a kind of a just overview of what vertical farming is.
Sure.
Yeah. For people that don't know, so vertical farming is the movement of crop production indoors, and the way that I try and convey it is the eliminating all the variability that exists outdoors. So obviously you have to use artificial lighting, so LEDs. We don't use soil, for example, because soil brings in a lot of bacteria. It also brings in insects and so on. All these things are clearly very bad. And it's stacked, so it's more efficient per meter cubed. I can get into a lot more detail later on if you want about plant algorithms and growing algorithms and our systems, But essentially, it's using less land to produce crops in a better way. It's weird to say in a healthier way. And I guess one other way to present it would be building on my healthcare background and life sciences background is, building a system or using a system that's preventative and diagnosing crops and then treating them and then sending them out to the world for people to eat. So we spent the first 3.5 years as growers using other people's systems. We built up a customer base of probably 100 plus restaurants. This is not just 3 Michelin star food. We work with people like Marcus Waring, Tom Aikens, and so on. But anything from that through to catering, we were able to compete at price parity, which I think is very, very important. It should not be something that is just because it's better produced. It should not be a price premium. I'm very, very against that. So I did that, and then I guess in about 2020, we were doing okay, but competing against the kind of the big players in the industry that were kind of
all those horizontal farms. Is that like the?
So yeah, when I say the big players in the industry, it mostly glass houses that were selling into New Covent Garden Market, and then we're going out to the distributors, then to the restaurants. Very challenging when you don't have scale, right? When you're investing 100K into a farm. I was working literally 7 nights a week, starting at 7 p.m. My wife was doing deliveries in the morning, and whilst I was watching our kids, waiting for her to come back so I could sleep, and then having to go out and actually find more customers, right? It was really, really tough for those first couple of years. So we got to this point where we already realized the technology that we were using was not right. It was not integrated. It had been piecemealed together from greenhouses, predominantly the Dutch, who were amazing at that, and that we needed to change our model and call it fate or luck or whatever, but we were at a place where we literally had almost zero cash. We were packing up our boxes to actually move back to my wife's home country of France in Paris, and I sat down 2 days later and sat on seats like this, but they were barrels at a tapas bar and raised £4.1 million. And then we were like, okay, now we can actually do what we want to do. So that was a real transition point. And if it could have been a day or two out, maybe we wouldn't be having this talk right now.
So was that the inflection point where you decided that growing wasn't the way forward and you were going to move more towards sort of being a technology company, helping other people establish, monitor and maintain vertical farms?
Definitely, and there have been many strategic pivots since then. But I think that to carry out what you've said, I mean, there's nothing wrong with growers, but they need the right technology. They need the right plant science. They need, there's a big difference also between plant science and growers, people that actually, have green fingers and have worked in traditional farms. Also the software engineering side of things, everything that we've developed since. So yeah, that was definitely the one pivotal transition point. There've been a couple others after, but I'd say that's the most significant for us.
Now, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but maybe you can fill in the gaps between where we are in the story and what I've been seeing recently now. You have been in talks with various different governments around the world to sort of look at their food security as climate change becomes more of a pressing concern. And you've also looked into, or might be already underway, vertical farming in space, or using your technology in space. So I guess not to just like jump to all the fun stuff that I want to talk about and make sure everyone gets to hear about, but between where we are now and there would be great.
Where shall I start on that? There are actually, so we've been talking about food and food security, and also I would always say water security, because I think that's going to be one of the most pressing concerns moving forward for the next 20 years and beyond. Space, yes, we have different divisions within our company. So we have our plant science team. We are the number one in terms of number of grants won in the UK, which is great, and it's allowed us to collaborate. And some of those, one of those grants was a consortium with various universities around the world, including Australia, some Australian universities, also a little bit of input from NASA. But primarily a company called Axiom Space, who are developing the next space station, which I think is going to be, in low Earth orbit by 2026 or 2027. But with every project, I always add a year or two, and yes, our systems are going to be on there, but they're going to be very small. So it's a nice thing to say, and it's a good thing for our plant scientists, but it's not really addressing what we want to do here as our primary business model.
And I think as well, with vertical farming being discussed so much from a lens of being able to scale output and create food in a more sustainable way, I think jumping immediately into space without kind of addressing, sort of shared planetary issues that we have right here, right now. So going back to that, can we talk about unit economics and some of the major issues that I think keep reappearing in discussions around vertical farming? It seems to me like vertical farming had a lot of hype, especially back in 2020. Lots of people entered, lots of people, got shaken out or went bust. But obviously, you persisted. It seems to me like labour costs and sort of ongoing maintenance of really, really technical stuff means it's just hard to compete. And when we're talking about quality of produce, right, nobody's actually paying extra, well, maybe in cases of sort of restaurants, for vertically grown crops. So how do these farms stay sustainable, and do you see that sort of changing in the future as sort of food security becomes an even bigger issue?
So I think there's 2 points here. One is vertical farming as a standalone model, and we can talk a bit more about integrating with high-tech glass houses and so on, because actually I think that's more of the future and more of the addressable market globally. I don't believe in these very small-scale shipping containers, right? They're good in terms of community involvement, in terms of education, in terms of talking about food and the importance of nutrition and so on. But they don't work, right? I shall merge the 2 points into one, but there are regions around the world that eminently have far more acute issues in terms of food and specifically water security than the UK. We're pretty, farmers are struggling here, but the MENA region, also very cold regions like, for example, Canada, there are huge issues that are going to become worse and worse and worse. And I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I think, I attend, a lot of these different conferences around the world. I'm not going to name them on this because it's being filmed, but there are a lot of promises made and they're never delivered. Everybody's high-fiving each other and saying, yes, we're going to, temperature's only going to go up by X amount. We already know that we've missed that. And I worry for my children, really. I won't be around. I worry for my children's children. I worry for inequality and mass migration and population growth. And people talk a lot about population growth, but it's actually more the fact that as populations grow, they migrate more towards population centers. So there are so many problems. Now, does vertical farming solve all of those? No, no way. We're one very small part of a much larger food ecosystem, CEA, and other sectors as well, that need to be working together to address these problems. Will we address them adequately? Probably not, without a lot of negative externalities. If we look at geopolitics right now, it is horrific. And I do worry a lot about these things because, building this infrastructure, even, our farms, takes time. And you need governmental buy-in, you need capital raising and so on. But, we've proven it works. Implementation is the problem, and getting different countries to work together is probably an even bigger problem.
Yeah, and it feels like, it's very easy to believe, see all around us, we feel like we're in a world governed by capital and business and big corporations. And it's really interesting you touched on worrying about your children, your children's children, and that just doesn't really align with the sort of timelines that investors want to think about, right? They're looking for a quick buck with a payback that will let them revel in that sort of exit liquidity and go take a nice holiday somewhere. But these problems are intergenerational problems, so it'd be great to sort of learn how you view funding and how you've managed to raise, I think it's £37 million without going to these people who want to rip their hands of it within 5 or 10 years.
This is a really relevant point, and I'll also circle back to your point around the failure of a lot of the kind of big vertical farms. Actually, even in the last couple of months, you've seen some of these farms just disappear and say that they're going to reinvent their business model, but it's I know a lot of inside stuff which I can't discuss, but it's not the case. A lot of the hype around vertical farming came from the US. I'm half American. I grew up in Seattle. I don't sound like it, clearly. In the US, you have a very different approach to capital raising than you do in many other markets. I'm not a corporate finance specialist or anything like that, but I've spoken to probably 100 VC firms. The problem that I think occurred in the US is that people jumped on the idea because it's a really interesting idea, right? It's like, okay, whether you believe in climate change or not, and whether you believe in if it's man-made or whatever, it's a problem, right? And it's a new market, and this is something that came around 10, 15 years ago. A lot of the big companies and big investors, including people like Jeff Bezos and so on, dumped loads of money into these firms. There are firms that have raised in excess of $600, $900 million, and they've built one farm, and their revenue has been like 10 or 20 or $30 million. Go figure. If anybody can tell me how that works as a business model, unless there's some kind of genius, algorithm or something that's come out of that, or something involving genetics, which genetics is very obviously expensive to develop, then it's a complete farce. And really, I'm honest in saying that the US has been the driver of a lot of the negativity around vertical farming and wider CEA globally, which has been very unfortunate. But actually, I think it's coming to a head. And from a positivity standpoint, we can say that we should take the learnings from those failures and make sure that they don't happen again. It's not, vertical farming and CEA is not going to disappear. What and then moving more on to the point around funders need to understand that this is different, right? We rely on 5 or 6 crops globally. Vertical farms at the minute have really only grown things like lettuces, baby leaf salads, strawberries, debatable, and a few other crops at price parity. Price parity being very important. And sorry, when I say price parity, I mean versus imports. That's very, very important, especially if you don't want to increase inequality. I think the VC firms, so VCP, have been used to investing in companies and new sectors. So when they heard about vertical farming and expecting 2 to 5 year returns. Right, we're talking about commodity crops here, right? I'm not even talking about those 5 or 6 things, including wheat and rice. Look at what's happening in Ukraine. The breadbasket of Europe. Look at what is happening in Vietnam, where you've got mass migration. So there really needs to be a change in the ideology and the expectations for VC funds and so on. All of the capital that we raised in our company, as you rightly said, we've raised 37 million, and we're hopefully about to raise another 30 for tech development, and then also building farms, which is just obviously revenue. Has been from family offices, and this has been from family, intergenerational wealth, who believe in the concept of what we're doing, right, and want to address it. We've been offered we've received many offers from VC firms over the years. I have nothing against VC firms, but we just can't meet their expectations because I don't believe that a lot of them really fundamentally understand all of the different elements involved in our sector to make it a success.
That's fascinating, and I can see why you would go towards that sort of family office style, and you might find people a little more receptive and understanding of the problem. I'm conscious we're coming up on like 30 minutes, so I'd be really interested to get any questions from the audience if anybody has. Oh wow, that's a huge show of hands. Let's start with you speaking first. So yeah.
So, are we missing something? If we think about the pace of change that's required, if we're going to address some of the food security and, let's face it, national security issues related to food, and we can't meet the expectations of VC funds in terms of growth and return, are we as a sector, as people who are involved in like plant science, food systems, supply chains, are we missing something? Is there some element of scalability or technology that we haven't tapped into? Or is it expectation management that it is just that slow?
It's a bit of both. So it's definitely slow. For us to build a scalable. So, for example, we're looking at building a very large farm in Saudi at present. That's going to take 2 years to build, and you then have to build in something on top of that. So there you go. You got 2.5 years, down the drain basically before you even start producing, right? The expectation management thing is, I don't think we're going to hit, as I said, we're not going to hit our targets and so on. It is what it is. Now, are we missing something? Genetics has a big role to play and when I say genetics, I'm more specifically talking about gene editing. I'm not, a geneticist, but our chief scientific officer is. We're starting to focus more on specific crops, but my concern is that I sometimes get this wrong, but I think the 5 or 6 crops that we get 70 or 75% of our energy from, we're way off of that, right? And if you look even 5 or 10 years in the future, my prediction is that, unless there's some serious change in terms of genetics, and it's implemented very quickly, you've got the implementation issue, clearly, that we're in trouble. So my prediction is that prices are going to go way up in every country. There will be, sorry, this is going to sound horrible, there will be water wars, which are already happening, right? You've just had a big dam built in North Africa, which is going to potentially block the Nile, right? So I think we're in for a tough ride. And I'd love to sit here and say it's all rosy and innovation will, people talk about, innovation is just going to solve everything, right? But we have to accept that actually, no, there's going to be some really, really tough times. I attended an MIT, leadership course at MIT from, an excellent professor. They've developed a climate change model. I don't have the web address, I wouldn't remember it here, but I suggest you go to that. It's been developed over 20 years and it is amazing. It's got every variable, and if you look at it, you will be scared by the impact of the relative impact of innovation compared to everything else that needs to happen globally to actually have some impact of a material impact of change. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think we'll take one more back on here.
So you've done a lot of analysis and you've tried different crops, you've tried different formats, and clearly there's many different ways to produce crops. So this is a way. Where do you think the niche is where vertical farming can be the solution? It could be the crop, it could be the location, it could be the heat, it could be the water shortage. So what is the niche that you've managed to convince investors of that this is worth investing in?
There are very basic elements or value propositions which vertical farming. It's you can't really argue against it. The fact that we're producing, if it's designed properly, the farm, you've got the right technology and you're following the right operational procedures, that we're not using herbicides, pesticides, fungicides. We're using, depending on the height of the farm, up to 200 times less land to produce the same amount of crop or even more crop. We can produce much closer to the point of consumption. Food miles, which people talk about a lot, are actually a very small element if you're looking at a life cycle assessment, but still matter, right? And I believe in the power of science. I'm not a scientist, but we've only just scratched. If you look at agricultural research, peer-reviewed research, it's if you give it a score out of 10, it's probably like a 2, right? In the crops that we're focused on. I think that we can really, really address that, but it's going to take time. And the only way you can do that, we don't have time to talk about it, but is the power of light science. LED lighting, fine, yes, you've got the point. You've got the question about energy and how it's powered. It has to come from sustainable forms. That I think that's probably most of the answer. But I go back to my other point. It's not a one-stop shop solution. It is geography dependent. It should not be implemented everywhere. And I also think that the future, and I think I already mentioned it, is a combinatorial approach with glass houses, for example. So I'm not going to name the company, but there was a company in the US, for example, that we worked with at the beginning of last year, and we found that just by I think it was like 2% of the space of their glass house, by investing, I don't know, it was a very small amount, we were able to increase their biomass by about 60%, just through more effective germination rates and the use of other technologies and the use of light science. So I think the future is working together. There is no solution that's single solution that's going to work.
Just to say one thing, that vertical farming is then the wrong name. Yeah.
What's the right name? Say again? Yeah, I mean, and I I don't know who jumped on the name vertical farming when they came about it, but yeah, PFAL is actually a far more precise and accurate name.
Yeah,
I agree.
so that's a great place to wrap, because Jamie's obviously going to change his company name tomorrow.